Hello and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today we look back on the remarkable career of John Coltrane as it's the anniversary of his death in 1967. Now, John Coltrane, when you actually look at the years he was recording and active, he had a very short life, but in that time, he became one of the most important jazz musicians ever. Some would say the most important jazz musician ever. And it was in the 50s and 60s that he really came into his own as someone who played on very, very important albums for the world of not just the jazz genre, but music in general. And most importantly, produced albums of his own that were absolutely marvelous. Now, I think that John Coltrane got better and better with every year, and that his final years were actually some of his best. It was in the sort of mid 60s, in his mid 60s glory days, if you want my opinion, that he played with possibly one of the best bands in all of jazz. And this was, of course, the classic quartet, so called, which featured one of the greatest pianists of all time, McCoy Tyner, on piano, the great Jimmy Garrison on bass, and one of the finest drummers ever, Elvin Jones, on the drums. And everything was just at another level. The compositions, the playing, the relationships between the musicians, the way that they could listen to each other without trying and react to each other so naturally. And this was really on tape on all of the albums. They really were captured in the studio at their best. I personally love the album Sunship, which was released posthumously in 71, but it was recorded in the middle of this golden era in 65. It features that great quartet. And then there was, of course, an extremely crazy and avant-garde album that was recorded that very same year, but also released posthumously. And this was called Om, just Om, O-M. And it featured Pharoah Sanders, a protege of Jean Coltrane, and one of my very, very favorite musicians ever. And it also included members of the great quartet. And that really, even though the album there is really chaotic, you can feel that even within the chaos, there's a profound kind of spirituality that helps center it, even in spite of this. So many other great albums from other eras in early, going just a slightly earlier, but still with this great quartet. There's the wonderful album Ballads in 1963. And this album, again, as the name would imply, one of the absolute best ballad albums for instrumental jazz ever. There was the Great Africa Brass album from 61, which was sort of a transitional album from the sort of early Coltrane to the sort of golden age 60s Coltrane. Giant Steps from 1960, everyone knows that. Total classic. We can't forget Blue Train. All of the stuff that he did in that era was absolutely phenomenal. And frankly, all of his eras. Now, what made him so special? Well, I would say that his approach to songwriting and arranging was one of the things, one of the many things that made him so special, because his very modern use of chordal harmony was something that really helped to bring jazz into a new era. He went beyond the traditional blues scale, if you will, and used some harmonies that were as sophisticated as anything that had frankly been heard up until that point. His ability to perform was superlative, second to none. He could be smoother than silk, he could be loud and domineering, but at all times, the power of his playing was always in control. There was never a sense that you were going to sort of fall off the cliff with John Coltrane. It just wasn't going to happen. There was something tight, there was something focused, even when that focus took the form of a musical exploration. And then there was the spiritual side. All of his albums, but I would say as you continued to go on and on, there was a growing sense of spiritual awareness. There was a sense that in many ways, Coltrane was one of the first jazz musicians in terms of the label to transcend the limitations of any label and any genre and really become someone who was using his music for a higher purpose and injecting spiritual messages through the instrumental music, which isn't something easily described and certainly something not easily done. But John Coltrane was absolutely someone who was able to do it. Another album, since I listed a few that you have got to check out, is John Coltrane and Johnny Hartman. Now, this is obviously one of the rare albums that John Coltrane released under his name with vocals, with the great vocals from, of course, Johnny Hartman, one of the finest singers in all of music. Really essential, especially if you're looking for something on the non-instrumental side. Check that out. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time and get listening to John Coltrane. You will not regret it. Take care.